high mobility, multi-purpose wheel vehicle. There must be an easier way to say it, and we'll have the answer this week on Motoring 97.
TSN's Motoring 97 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And Midas, for new longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.
Well, the star of this week's show will be making an appearance in just a few moments. Now, you probably think that being out here, we're going to show you one of the brand new sport utilities on the market. Well, brand new? No, this vehicle is not new. Call it a sport utility? I don't think so. This machine could eat up any traditional sport utility out here in off-road country. No, this machine earned its military stripes helping the Americans in Desert Storm. And of course, I'm talking about the Hummer. Well, we've got a real treat for you this week because we took part in a Hummer convoy when owners from Canada made a pilgrimage to the birthplace of what has become the replacement in the military for the Jeep. The Hummer is built by AM General Corporation in Southbend, Indiana. AM General is a descendant of Willys Overland Motors, which first created the Jeep, North America's first four-wheel drive truck. Back in 1979, AM General won the military contract to build a vehicle which would replace 5 different vehicles for the military, and that included the Jeep. The Humvee went into production in 1985, and nearly 150,000 have been built.
Desert Storm was a great proving ground for the truck. The military had it for several years prior to Desert Storm. There were over 19,000 units in the Gulf War, and they performed very, very well. They had a readiness rate of over 95%, which was the highest in the military's history.
Following the war, the Humvee showed up at the Detroit Auto Show as the Hummer.
Arnold Schwarzenegger had a lot to do with getting us involved. He actually chased down a convoy of military trucks one time to find out who made the thing. But we started in 1992 selling a handful of trucks direct while we were setting up a dealer body. And then in 1993 we launched our dealers trucks and the dealer body. And it's not something that we expected to make a lot of money on at first or do a lot of volume. It's a business that we fully expect is going to take a few years to grow into.
Along with BMWs and Toyotas, Northwest Motors in Toronto jumped at the chance to become the exclusive dealer for Hummers in Ontario. It was their idea to take a convoy of Canadian owners from Ontario and Quebec to South Bend, Indiana, a 1,500-kilometer round trip.
We decided early on when we took on the Hummer that the Hummer was different from any other regular vehicle. I mean, it's apparent. And we wanted to create an ownership experience indicative of the Hummer.
We own a tree service in Brockville, and we've got offices in Kingston, Belleville, and Smith Falls, and we bounce it from area to area for promotional purposes. And each time it goes to those areas, the workload increases dramatically, and you'll have 400 or 500 people come just to see the Hummer.
Humvee is the acronym for the military truck, and that is High Mobility Multi-Purpose Wheeled Vehicle. And that was the original military acronym to describe what the vehicle was going to do. From the Humvee came the Hummer, and the Hummer was sort of a nickname for the Humvee on the military bases. But then when AM General built a civilian version of the Humvee, they attached the Hummer nameplate to it as to differentiate between the two vehicles.
The military truck and the commercial are built on the same assembly line. They come down with the same specifications, the T6 aluminum bodies. They both have 2,800 rivets in every truck. The frames are built, same engines, same drivetrain. Everything's identical coming down the main line. After it comes off the line, the engine starts and they pull it away. That's when the changes, the differences become. The trim On the commercial is much more creature friendly. Soft padded seats, sound insulation is improved. There's a nice stereo in the truck, unlike the military truck, which is pretty austere by comparison.
Use a lot of brake. It's okay. Good. Keep coming. We have 3 areas to the course, from novice to advanced, and your driver is really the one that's challenged. Okay, easy, easy. Come forward. The vehicle is amazing, and it just about drives the trail in spite of you. So it depends on the driver finesse, and the trails get very challenging. We get at some pretty extreme angles, and the idea is not to be alarmed or to panic, but to use what you've been taught and drive through it.
Well, I'm from Stouffville, Ontario. I enjoy this vehicle because I can drive it just about anywhere. That's the big attraction.
He just came home with it one day and said, "This is my new vehicle."
Can you understand the popularity? Is it a guy thing? Is it a macho thing?
It's definitely a guy thing. Midlife crisis.
Are you allowed to have one too? And what would you buy?
What would I buy? I drive a Suburban.
No, it's not a guy thing.
No?
No, I like to do this. And when I was up there, I want to go down. I was nervous, but I want to do that. It's a good thrill.
Whatever it is, they like the Hummer because it's different, and I think they like the attention it gets, because parked beside a Ferrari, this truck will get 10 times the attention.
The truck isn't really for everybody, and that's not a snobbish answer, but it's not for the average person. It's a truck that if you truly want to go off-road in some difficult terrain, this is the right truck for you.
Our Sonoma came equipped with the L35-4300 Vortec V6. Suffice it to say, the V6 does the job. Pickups and pylons. Not very often you see the two on one edition of Test Drive. Well, you will this week as we take a look at the lowrider version of the GMC Sonoma. The ZQ8 Sport suspension package adopts the European philosophy of a stiff platform with slightly softer spring rates and high damping control. To achieve this, the chassis has been strengthened and the whole lot has been lowered by 2 inches, hence the reference to the lowrider look. Up front there are independent double wishbones, coil springs, decarbon high-pressure monotube gas shocks and a beefed-up 33mm stabilizer. In back there are a pair of 2-stage leaf springs, the same decarbon shocks and a 23mm stabilizer. Add to that quick ratio steering, a spool valve that has been tuned to offer better road feel and feedback, a monstrous set of P235-55 R16 Goodyear Eagle GA touring tyres, and a third shock that runs parallel with the right rear spring, and you complete the package. Now the latter was added to control axle tramp. Not only does the Sonoma handle like the Dickens, it also gives you a surprisingly good ride comfort, meaning that unlike many so-called tuned suspensions, you don't need a kidney belt. Our Sonoma came equipped with the L35-4300 Vortec V6. Output is rated at 180 horsepower and 245 pounds-feet of torque. Now this engine is based on the General's bulletproof 5.7 litre V8 minus the back 2 cylinders. Suffice it to say the V6 does the job because it produces in excess of 200 pounds-feet of torque across the entire operating range. Now much of the credit for this performance goes to GM's Vortex swirl port induction system and a sophisticated sequential center port fuel injection system. From just off idle to the 5200 RPM redline, the engine pulls in a strong and linear fashion, It is also almost completely devoid of the usual raucous associated with high-torque truck engines. Only as you pass the 4,000 RPM mark does the engine do anything but purr as it pulls. The manual gearbox offers precise shifts, acceptably short throws between gears, and the selected ratios allow the driver to make the best use of the engine's power. The clutch action, however, is a disappointment because it's on the heavy side of right, which makes stop-and-go traffic more of a chore than it really needs to be.
Pet peeve, you're darn right. Vehicles that come with a clutch, pickup truck or not, should not have a foot-operated parking brake. It's going to cost you a clutch prematurely, and that's a lot of money.
Stopping power is supplied by a front disc rear drum setup that comes with a standard four-wheel anti-lock system. During the brake tests I required just 119 feet to stop from 80k, which is good for a truck. The unexpected bonus is that the pedal feel is surprisingly good for a GM. Too often I find GM brakes on the vague side, at least from a pedal feel perspective.
This Sonoma features GM's much ballyhooed third-door easy access system. Now, believe it or not, this thing is of a mixed blessing. Yes, it makes stuff very easy to put behind the front seats, but it also limits the seating capacity to 3. The reason? 2 bucket seats, a center console, and 1 jump seat, because you can't mount one on this door. Now, if you happen to have 2 kids, as I do, one of them's out of luck. While GM have done a lot to improve the safety of the Sonoma truck, they still haven't added a right side airbag. Instead, we still got a good old glove box. Now, they tell us that the airbag will arrive in '98. Before it comes, I urge them to do one of 2 things. Either make better use of the rear of the cab, or do as Ford did and add a defeat switch.
Elsewhere, the roomy interior is stacked as expected, meaning power locks and windows, a decent sounding stereo with cassette, and at long last a single key now operates both the door and ignition lock. Typically though, there are still some anomalies. The turn signal lever houses far too many functions, and much of the switchgear is so oversized it looks out of place.
The Sonoma Sport should make some waves, because this thing is certainly as much fun to drive as most sports cars. It handles better than most of them, and when equipped with a V6, well, it goes along very nicely. That it costs less than $26,000 the way this one's equipped, well, that's an added bonus. It's time to update you on our long-term CR-V. Now, when I did the original test drive on the right-hand drive version, I commented on the defroster's operation. On a more positive note, the rotary climate controls are very positive to the feel. The other thing I like, when you turn it to defrost, the AC comes on. Turn it off defrost, and off goes the AC. Now, that's the opposite to every other Honda product and the way it should be. Well, guess what? On the left-hand drive version, when you turn it to defrost, the AC comes on, as it should. When you turn it back to floor, the AC stays on. That is wrong, because it will exact a fuel economy penalty if you forget to turn the AC off. It also, even when you cycle the ignition key, it stays on. Now, when I asked Honda why this was, they didn't have an answer. It's now in the hands of the product planning guys, and as soon as we get an answer, you'll get one.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns odors that can emanate from a vehicle's air conditioning system. I've got an article here that says that researchers from the American Society for Microbiology dismantled the AC systems or air conditioning systems from 32 various different cars and found out that they were all infested to some degree with various different types of fungi, up to 12 different types. And this can cause that dirty sock offensive odor that you find inside the car and classic allergy symptoms. Now, here's what happens. Inside the car, there's a finned aluminum component that we refer to as the evaporator core. It's really cold, and it collects condensation when the air conditioning system's running. I'm sure you've all seen that trickle of water coming out from underneath the car when the air conditioning system's running on a humid day. Now, as well as removing humidity from the air, an AC system also virtually washes the air. Any pollen, dust, and dirt that's passed over that evaporator core will stick to those moisture droplets and be washed out of the car. However, when you shut the car off and the evaporator core is no longer cold, it gets warm, it comes up to whatever the ambient temperature is, and mold spores start to grow in there. This is what produces the odor. Here's what you can do, and here's the tip. After you arrive at your destination, instead of just shutting the car off, turn off the AC system and allow the fan to run on high for several minutes. That'll effectively dry the evaporator core and help to prevent the buildup of these mold spores. Second thing that you can do is purchase an aerosol product just like this one. You spray it into these louvers just ahead of the windshield. This is where air enters the vehicle's cabin and the air conditioning system. You run the air conditioner on high with no one in the vehicle and the windows and doors open. Spray this aerosol product in here and it'll effectively kill that odor by killing the mold spores. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Car manufacturers will tell you that when it comes to selling vehicles, passive safety like dual airbags are the #1 feature consumers are looking for. Well, it appears Toyota is taking it a step further and sent us a tape illustrating active safety features they are now working on. First, we have the drowsy driver warning system. Sensors monitor the car's steering operation and even the driver's pulse to detect falling levels of alertness. The driver is advised to take a break through an audio-visual warning. If driver alertness continues to fall, the seat vibrates and again warns the driver to take a break. If the driver does not get the hint and alertness continues to fall further, the system stops the car automatically. This, of course, could come as a big surprise to traffic following behind on a busy freeway. And finally, under the bizarre column, we have an airbag for pedestrians. It's installed in the hood of the car. Sensors activate the airbag when it senses a collision. The theory is, if the pedestrian is standing in the right spot, it will minimize head injuries. It's comforting to know this system is still in the concept stage.
You know how us taxpayers always like to complain that governments are wasting our money, right? Well, here's a switch. The U.S. military sends their old trucks to AM General here in Southbend, Indiana, where they receive a 2-for-1 deal. Now, the company takes components from 2 trucks and builds the military a brand new truck for half the price. And these trucks are not like the ones originally built back in the 60s. They come with central tire inflation, air ride, air brakes, automatic transmission, and so on. Now, if these trucks like the Hummer ended up in a showroom someday, what would they cost? Close to $150,000 with all the options. So there you go. All right, let's head to the garage. Join Bill Gardner.
Brad, a couple of comments on the Hummer. First of all, I'm with Susan. I take a Suburban out of a Hummer any day. Not so big and ungainly and a lot less money. And if you want to go off-roading, an ATV or a motocross bike, by far better as far as I'm concerned. Another thing I wanted to mention too is the fact that a lot of time customers come into the shop here and we're in the midst of doing a repair that's difficult and of course costly to them if it is. And one of the things that they generally always say is, I wish mechanics designed some of these vehicles. They wouldn't be so difficult to repair and therefore not so costly to fix. And you know something? If mechanics were designing vehicles, they'd probably be just as heavy and costly and ungainly as that Hummer. They'd be built like tanks. Believe me, I don't think you'd want to buy one. They'd be like the cars of the mid-70s. In any case, what I want to talk about this week is a problem that can afflict your brake system. And we've got a car here on the hoist, an Oldsmobile 98, that came in for a certification. The car's changing hands, so it has to be inspected. Now, at first glance, there didn't seem to be too much wrong with it. I drove the car, and the brakes actually didn't feel too bad in dry conditions. However, when we pulled the wheel off and had a look inside the drum, we can see there's a pretty serious problem with this car. It's pretty evident what the problem is. You can see that everything in here is wet with brake fluid. Now what's happened is this wheel cylinder up here has leaked. The brake fluid has gotten out and gotten onto the brake shoes. This gooey mess that you see up here is a mixture of brake fluid and the dust that normally occurs when these brake linings wear. And all this, under normal circumstances, there would just be a dry, fine dust in here, and we've got this gooey mess of brake fluid and brake dust. And you can see it all the way down the shoe. It's covered just about every part in here. And if you have a look inside the brake drum, you can actually see a little bit of brake fluid trickling down there, and everything in here is wet as well. Now we're going to have to rebuild or replace the wheel cylinder. In this case, replace the brake shoes because they're saturated. Now in more minor leaks, we can just degrease the components if the fluid hasn't reached the linings and saturated them. And we've got to clean up this brake drum as well, degrease it, and clean all the other parts in here before we put it back together. Now, if you notice that the brake fluid level in your master cylinder is continually going down, more so than would account for normal wear and tear. And believe me, brake fluid does deplete in the master cylinder as your front brakes wear. That fluid goes in behind the front caliper pistons and it's normal for the fluid level to go down somewhat. But in the case of this car, it was losing a considerable amount of fluid, and here's where it all went. So this has to be repaired before the vehicle can be certified. Now, the typical symptom of a car with this kind of condition would be possibly fairly normal braking under light application in dry weather. However, this car, in a heavy application in the rain, this wheel could easily lock up. It'd be difficult to modulate the brake application on the rear of this car, and you could have a spin situation. This wheel could lock up prematurely or ahead of the rest of the wheels and spin the car out. So it's something you want to take care of as soon as you notice a condition like this. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 97.
Everybody respects and admires Japanese cars, but does anybody love them? More on that next on Kenzie's Corner.
A portion of Motoring 97 is brought to you by the Solder Seal Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
I took this Acura NSX to show to a friend of mine who's a Jaguar dealer, and he said, "Let me tell you what's wrong with Japanese sports cars." He said it's like a shirt. If you asked me for the best shirt in the world, I'd say buy a polyester shirt. You can wash it in a creek, you could throw it in a cement mixer and it wouldn't wrinkle, it would last forever, it'd probably cost you $18. But no, you'd probably go for 100% combed cotton, Egyptian cotton of course, $110 monograms extra. The thing would wrinkle if you looked sideways at it, and it would, within 6 months you're probably using it to polish your windows. So why would you wear a shirt like that? Because it makes you feel good when you're wearing it. And that, he said, is why European sports cars are superior. They make you feel good when you're driving them because of the heritage and the breeding. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I got into this thing this morning. I felt like I was getting into a Le Mans race car. All you see from the driver's seat are these beautiful flared fenders and the road right in front of you. You fire up the motor back here, you run it up to 8,000 RPM, fabulous sound, metallic exhaust note about 8 inches off your right ear. The gearbox feels like a well-oiled rifle bolt mechanism, 6 speeds, fabulous styling, all aluminum construction, great brakes, terrific handling. Hey, if you can't get passionate about driving a car like this, you better check your pulse. You might not have one. I tell you, I felt pretty good driving this car. Now, when the NSX was introduced, it cost about $80,000, and overstock dealers had trouble selling them for even $60,000, and now it's up to $135 grand. Incredible as it may seem, it's still a bargain compared to something like a Ferrari 355. Now, you say you can't make a comparison like that? Well, sure, Ferrari doesn't build sport utility family cars like that CR-V in the background, but how many Formula One races have Ferrari motors won in the last decade compared to how many Honda motors have won? I make my case. Still, this car is probably the last generation of the NSX, and it may not be replaced. It could join the 300ZX Nissan, the Toyota Supra, and the Mazda RX-7 in that great automotive boneyard in the sky for great Japanese sports cars. I think that's a shame. But I'll tell you what you do. You find a good used one of these, they're all over the place and they're cheap. Stick it in your garage for 10 years. You'll thank me some sweet day. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Despite its price and its size, the Hummer does not get a luxury or gas guzzling tax because it is classified simply as a truck. Well, truck or no truck, as Martin said earlier, you put this on my block beside a Ferrari and a Range Rover, and this will be the vehicle that'll get bragging rights for the entire year. And isn't that what it's all about? Until next week, we'll see you for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 97 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And Midas for new, longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.